Welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. The executioner is now head of the executive branch. Where is it? The man known as the hangman of Tehran is the new president of the nation of Iran. And he's expected to accelerate Iran's nuclear program. So what is Israel's reaction? And what are the ramifications for the United States? Chris Mitchell brings us this warning from Jerusalem.
As Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei boasted how the Iranian nation fulfilled its democratic responsibilities, many others called the election a sham.
They didn't even put up the facade of democracy. It was a one-man race. Anyone who could have threatened his victory was screened by the Guardian Council about a month ago, so they wouldn't get in the way.
As a prosecutor and member of the infamous death committees in the 1980s, the incoming president, Ibrahim Raisi, earned the nickname the Hangman of Tehran.
The executioner is now in the head of the executive branch. He sentenced thousands of people to death. There are the death sentences of the mass murders of 1988 that were buried in common graves without even marking.
In 2019, the U.S. government placed sanctions on Raisi, and Amnesty International has called for him to be charged with crimes against humanity. Official results indicate less than 50% of Iranians voted, an historic low turnout. Some claim it was even less, as dozens of videos online show no one at many polls.
In an election where they know a murderer will win, why hold it?
These Iranian mothers joined an online appeal to boycott the election.
Dear brave Iranians, don't vote in these elections. We have been voting for 40 years. This is the result. They killed our children.
In Jerusalem, new Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett says the election results will hopefully open the eyes of the world to see Iran for what it truly is.
Raisi's selection is, I would say, the last chance for the world powers to wake up before returning to the nuclear agreement and to understand who they're doing business with. These guys are murderers, mass murderers. A regime of brutal hangmen must never be allowed to have weapons of mass destruction that will enable it to not to kill thousands but millions.
Chris is with us now from Jerusalem. Chris, can you tell us more about Raisi's background, like being a member of those death committees in the 1980s?
Yeah, I can, Pat. There were four members on that particular committee, and what they did, there were two fatwas that were issued by then Ayatollah Khomeini, and there were two questions. First of all, one was political, the other was religious. And some people have described it sort of like a medieval committee. And really, people, if they answered one way or another, were sentenced to death. Some of the trials, Pat, lasted for just a few minutes. Some were deemed apostates, and up to 5,000 may have been killed. So Raisi today, he says, when he was asked about these killings back in the 1980s, he said he was a defender of human rights. But some have said this was the greatest crime of the Islamic Revolution.
Chris, how can they put a man like that in charge of the country? Now, the people in Iran didn't vote. I mean, the voting turnout was very small, and those mullahs have control of everything, so he's a hand-picked man. Well, what's it going to mean in terms of Israel? Are they going to, is Iran going forward with this nuclear program, and what's Israel going to do to respond?
Well, I think two explanations for why this man was elected. Actually, people are calling it a selection, not an election, because of what they did with the Guardian Council that really eliminated any potential competitors to Raisi. One is that it continues on its ambitions to get a nuclear weapon. The other may be that this was a possible successor to, right now, to Ali Khamenei. And what will Israel do, Pat? They won't let Iran get a nuclear weapon. I mean, you can say yesterday, Yair Lapid said they were determined not to let Iran get a nuclear weapon. Just a couple of weeks ago, the former head of the Israeli Mossad said he asked rhetorically, What does Iran need for us to explain to them? We won't let them get it. He's been responsible for many of the covert operations. And Pat, I think you need to go back to the Begin doctrine. Back in 1981, Begin had a doctrine, Menachem Begin had a doctrine that any of its neighbors would not get weapons of mass destruction. That's when he ordered the strike in 1981 against the Iraqi nuclear program. And then in 2007, then Prime Minister Ehud Olmert destroyed the Syrian nuclear reactor. The question right now, Pat, remains to be seen what's going to happen in 2021. What will this new Israeli government do about Iran's nuclear program?
Well, it looks like the Biden administration is moving ahead with talks on a nuclear deal. And does anybody in the Middle East believe the deal would stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons?
Exactly. And those are the dynamics that are going on right now, Pat. Here in Vienna, you have the United States negotiating with Iran. You have Iran electing this hardline conservative president. And you also have Israel watching these two dynamics. And Pat, there was a recent paper by 3 Israeli experts. And what they said is that right now the U.S. seems willing to allow only partial limits on Iran's enrichment. Remember, they're only one step away from weapons grade, and actually they're going to forego some of the supervision clauses. And what that's going to do is make Iran a nuclear threshold country, possibly months away from one bomb, then maybe more bombs. And their conclusion was this, that the deal being negotiated right now in Vienna won't limit Iran, but it will significantly limit Iran's ability to intervene.
Chris, you know, we've talked about the concept of the Mahdi, and we've also talked about their belief that when the Mahdi comes, there's going to be chaos, and then he will control the chaos and bring it all to an end. Now, the other prime minister believed that. Do you think this new man, Raisi, holds to those views?
I do, Pat. And in fact, I asked the Iranian expert that we had in our report about that, and he said, well, they're all 12ers. That means they believe in the appearance or the reappearance of the 12th Imam. It was Ahmadinejad. I think almost everyone remembers him. He was the one that really believed it so powerfully that he talked about it at the United Nations, and he talked about it often. But all of the clerics right now, the mullahs there, they believe in the 12th Imam. And so this really existential theology, and you mix that with their nuclear technology, it's really a toxic brew that poses a threat not only to Israel, but the entire region, especially the Sunni Arab nations, the United States, and Europe as well.
So, Chris, their religion would lead them to launch a nuclear strike, and that would in turn bring on the 12th Imam. Am I saying it right?
Well, one of the theologies is exactly that, Pat, that they believe that before the reappearance of the 12th Imam is that there would be chaos in the world. Now, if they get a nuclear weapon, they can certainly foment that chaos to bring him back to the world, according to their theology. So that's why it's so important, imperative here in Israel. That's what they believe, that Iran not be able to get a weapon of mass destruction, not only one bomb, Pat, but an arsenal of nuclear weapons.
Chris, thank you so much. Well, in other news, $6 trillion. That's how much Democrats want to spend on an infrastructure bill. That's more than we spent in all of World War II. And Republicans say, no way. So what's the alternative? George Thomas has that story.
Thanks, Pat. Hello, everyone. As Pat mentioned, a group of Republican and Democratic senators are offering a bipartisan infrastructure bill, and it is gaining support. But will the left wing of the Democratic Party go along? Dale Hood has a story.
All agree America's infrastructure needs help, but Congress still can't agree on how much to spend on it or even what infrastructure is. Republicans accuse Democrats of turning it into a wish list of liberal programs. A $1.2 trillion bipartisan plan has been gaining support among a group of 21 senators from both parties, but disputes continue over how big it should be and how it should be funded. Democrat Senator Bernie Sanders says it's not enough. He sees the infrastructure bill as an opportunity to redistribute wealth and help working families and the poor.
The working people of this country understand, Chuck, that for decades we have ignored their needs while the very richest people in this country have become richer. People throughout this country cannot afford childcare. People cannot afford, elderly people cannot afford hearing aids or dental care.
But Republican Senator Rob Portman, who is leading the effort on the compromise bill, says the Democratic alternative spending plan goes way beyond what has traditionally been considered infrastructure, like roads and bridges. The $6 trillion Democratic plan includes measures on climate change, health care, immigration, and more.
It's not about infrastructure. It's kind of a $6 trillion grab bag of progressive priorities. Ours is about core infrastructure, and it is paid for. And so it's paid for without raising taxes, which is key.
$6 trillion is more than we spent on World War II. And what they're calling infrastructure, the liberal left, to me is not remotely related to what's traditionally been called infrastructure. It's just a power grab by the Democratic Party in every area of our lives.
But Graham says the president has a chance to get a bipartisan deal if he wants it.
President Biden, if you want an infrastructure deal of $1 trillion, it's there for the taking.
The White House says it could have a response to the bipartisan infrastructure plan as early as today. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thank you, Dale. Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, a potential presidential contender, warned about the dangers of wokeism. In his speech at the Faith and Freedom Coalition's Road to the Majority Conference Saturday night, he said wokeism was widespread in universities, corporate media, and big businesses. Take a look.
And so this is something that I think requires us to fight back and fight back hard on. And one of the institutions that is most responsible for elevating woke ideology and for attacking people that share our values is big tech.
DeSantis also talked about how Florida handled the COVID pandemic differently from other states, keeping people, businesses, and schools a top priority, and much more. You can watch his entire speech on cbnnews.com. Tropical storm Claudette is expected to move into the Atlantic Ocean today after leaving behind a trail of destruction in the south over the weekend, spawning multiple tornadoes. Areas like this neighborhood in Bruton, Alabama, where at least 50 homes were damaged or destroyed. At least 13 people died due to the effects of the storm. 10 were killed in a multi-vehicle crash Saturday along a wet interstate, including 8 children in a van for a youth home for abused or neglected children. The National Transportation Safety Board sending 10 investigators to look into the tragic crash.